notes, but I've been trying to mentally track, I guess, the conversation that we've had so far. We started like our theme of measuring productivity versus performance, and I suppose that's where we separated out the idea of performance versus productivity. And I think it's fair to say that we came to the rough conclusion that productivity is relatively easy because it's quantitative, but performance, while performance can be reflected in the quantitative, it doesn't necessarily tell us the whole story. And because it's not telling us the whole story, that then brought us into the conversation of monitoring or managing performance versus productivity of the collective versus the contribution of individuals to that collective. And I think that was partly, Michael, where you brought in the HIPO or hypo, which I love that particular idea as well. That partly reflected into the anecdote I provided myself of the person who contributes least may, in some instances, actually contribute most when measured from a slightly different perspective. So I guess that then brought us into our conversation about the time frame over which we choose to measure things. So if we're measuring against very short term, and Michael, you gave us the wonderful example of a 3-week piece of work that quantitatively can get measured against a report, a box ticked, but actually under the surface, we might discover not such a well-functioning team, probably not a team that's going to come back together again, probably an investment of time and resource that actually may not have produced nearly as much long-term productivity as we might have reasonably expected. So that concept of if we measure something over a very short time versus over a very long period, how we go about measuring that, we need to be careful about so that we actually measure, I suppose, the most indicative elements that are going to differentiate between the individual's performance versus the collective team performance. I think it's probably fair to say, in summary of our discussion, it's not as simple as just count the number of widgets that were produced at the end of the production line. When we come to the human person-people dynamic, and I think this is a key point, Sue, that you brought out, was we are absolutely people before we are machines. And in being people, measuring what we do, how we do it, and then more importantly, and Sue, I'm now leaning back into something you said, how we do it in conjunction with other people now becomes a really important challenge, so that we then focus on measuring the correct things in the most appropriate way. And it may not always be about quantitative. In fact, it probably won't be always only about quantitative. And we just need to be cautious that we don't measure the wrong thing and end up getting a potentially wrong result.